The Man Who Never Left Baker Street. London has a way of remembering things you wish it wouldn't. Even when the buildings change, even when the people do, even when the dead are meant to stay that way. Detective Inspector Elias Crowe first noticed the man on a Thursday evening, just after the fog began to roll in, thick enough to muffle the street lamps. The man stood outside Baker Street Station, not loitering, not waiting, just standing. He wore a long dark coat, too old-fashioned for a city that had learned to disguise its past, and a narrow hat pulled low over his eyes. His posture was straight, unnatural somehow, as though he'd been placed there rather than arrived. Crowe noticed him because everyone else didn't. Commuters passed straight through him, not around him, through him in that subtle London way of refusing to acknowledge oddities for fear they might acknowledge you back. Crowe slowed his pace. The man didn't move. Crowe kept walking. He had paperwork waiting, and the kind of headache that only came from fluorescent lights and unanswered questions. Still, something about the man lodged itself behind his eyes. When Crowe glanced back from the corner, the man was gone. The case file arrived the next morning with no return address, no stamp, no fingerprints, just a single typed label, Missing Persons, Historical Cross-Reference. Crowe frowned. That's new. Inside were 5 reports, all yellowed, all originals. Dates ranged from 1891 to 1937, different officers, different handwriting, same description, male, early 40s, dark coat, hat, observed lingering near Baker Street, vanished when approached. Crowe's chest tightened. One report included a sketch. It was him, the man from last night. Crowe flipped through the rest of the folder. The final document wasn't a report. It was a death certificate. Name, Thomas Avery, declared deceased. 1892, cause unknown. Under remarks, someone had written in cramped ink, body never recovered. Witnesses insist he was seen again. Crowe sat back slowly. Someone was playing a joke, a bad one. Yet when he called records, they confirmed it. Thomas Avery, the clerk said. Yeah, weird one. He's flagged in the system. Comes up every few decades like clockwork. Why isn't this common knowledge? There was a pause, paper shuffling. Because every officer who looks too closely requests reassignment within the year, the clerk said quietly. Or early retirement. Crowe stared at the rain streaking down the window. And the ones who don't? Another pause. Those files don't stay complete. That night, Crowe returned to Baker Street. Fog pressed low, thick as breath against a mirror. The station entrance glowed like a wound in the dark. The man stood exactly where before. Crowe approached. This time, the man turned. His face was pale, almost translucent, as if the fog had borrowed his features. His eyes were sharp, alert, too alive for someone who had died over a century ago. You can see me, the man said. Crowe stopped 3 feet away. Apparently. The man exhaled, a sound like relief. That makes you the 4th. 4th what? To last this long? Crowe swallowed. You're Thomas Avery. A flicker of something crossed the man's face. Regret, maybe, or recognition. I was, he said, before London decided I belonged to it. What happened to you? Avery glanced toward the underground entrance. I uncovered something I wasn't meant to. Patterns, movements, people who never aged but never quite lived either. Crowe felt the city listening. They didn't kill me, Avery continued. That would have been simple. They tied me to the place instead, made me persistent. Crowe thought of the files that disappeared, the officers who left. Why me? Crowe asked. Avery met his gaze. Because you noticed, and because you haven't looked away yet. A train thundered beneath their feet. When the noise faded, Avery was gone. In his place lay a small leather notebook. Crowe picked it up. Inside were dates, Locations, names, all of them familiar, unsolved deaths, missing persons, cases quietly closed without answers, all centered around the same few streets, all repeating. Crow didn't sleep. By dawn, he understood the pattern. London didn't just forget, it recycled. Certain truths surfaced every generation, and each time the city chose someone to carry the burden until the weight crushed them or turned them invisible. Thomas Avery had been one. Now Crow was next. The realization settled into his bones. At 6:17 a.m., Crow did something no officer in the files had done. He submitted everything, every scan, every note, every cross-reference, public servers, redundant backups, press contacts scheduled for release. At 6:19, his phone rang. "Detective Crow," a voice said, calm, polite, ancient. "You're disrupting a necessary balance." Crow looked out over London, waking beneath the fog. "Then you should have picked someone who knew how to mind his business," he replied. The line went dead. 3 days later, Crow stood outside Baker Street Station once more. The fog was thinner. People hurried past, complaining about delays, checking their phones. Thomas Avery stood beside him. "You won't stay long now," Avery said softly. "No," Crow agreed. "But I won't vanish either." Avery smiled. For the first time, he looked almost human. "That's more than I ever managed." Crow felt the pull then, subtle, persistent, like the city testing its grip. He stepped back. The feeling faded. Avery's form began to blur. "Thank you," Avery said, "for remembering me." When he disappeared, it felt final. Crow turned away from Baker Street and walked into the morning. London exhaled, and somewhere deep beneath its streets, something ancient shifted. Uneasy now, watched at last.